Da kasin
Yesterday, we saw how verses 11, 12, 13, and 14 of our text explain why the proper practice of the path will lead to realization. Today, we're going to look at verses 15, 16, 17, and 18, which will explain both what is to be abandoned and what is to be realized by combining opposing and unopposing analogies. The first of these four verses, verse 15, uses the analogy of a reflection in a mirror. And the purpose of the presentation of this analogy is to instruct us to abandon or relinquish fixation on impure appearances and on the reality of impure appearances. Now, according to the analogy, if a child looks, a small child, looks at his or her reflection in the mirror, they may think there is actually another child in there. And therefore, they become attached to the reflection, thinking of it as a potential friend or playmate. And yet, there is no friend or playmate there. It is a mere reflection, and therefore not a fit object for attachment. If a monkey looks in a mirror, it may see the their reflection as another monkey, a potential threat or competitor, and therefore it may bare its teeth and glare ferociously at its own reflection. And yet, because what it is seeing is merely its own reflection, it is not a fit object for aversion or aggression. Just as the reflection in a mirror is not the actual presence of a legitimate object of attachment and aversion in the mirror, in the same way, what appears to and in the mind is not a legitimate object for either attachment or aversion. Whether we are speaking of the perception of appearances by the mind or the arising of kleshas within the mind, none of these things have any intrinsic reality. And yet, failing to understand this, we mistake them as real. For example, when anger arises in your mind, if you look at its nature, you see that it is unreal, that it has no true existence. If you do not look at the nature of the anger, however, it seems to be real and thereby overpowers you. When unhappiness arises in your mind, if you look at its nature, you see that it has no substantial characteristics. It has no color, shape, form, and so on. But if you do not look at its nature, you do not perceive or recognize its lack of reality, and therefore you are oppressed by it. So it is important not to follow or be caught by appearances within the mind. Because if we follow or are caught by our mental afflictions, such as anger, they will overpower us. And if we follow or are caught by unhappiness or regret, it will overpower us, oppress us with sadness. So therefore, in order to prevent these things from happening, when something arises in the mind, look at its nature. If we fixate on the reflections in the mirror as having true reality, we become enslaved by them. For example, if we are caught by or follow kleshas that arise within the mind, we become their slave. We have no freedom or control. If we are caught by or follow the sadness and unhappiness that arise in our mind, if we do not see its nature, we are enslaved by it and have no freedom. If you see the nature of kleshas and of mental states such as unhappiness and so forth, that nature is peace and bliss. Therefore, it is necessary to know the absence of true existence of kleshas and mental states such as unhappiness. And this must be known not by inference, but through direct observation. Okay. So before I translate what Rinpoche said about this verse, on page 6, the top 5 lines in bold, the last of these, through the formless nature will know uninterrupted meditation. That should be a footnote and not, it should be in the footnote, the second line of the footnote, rather than the 5th line. There is no 5th line of the verse. That should be at the bottom of the page after, likewise, those who enter the wheels of the mandalas. Is that clear? Okay. On the top of page 6, there is a 5-line verse or stanza. The last line of that, through the formless nature will know uninterrupted meditation, should be removed from that part of the page and put on the bottom of the page with the bold footnote, so that the bold footnote on the bottom of the page is a 2-line footnote, the second line of which presently appears as the 5th line on the top. I'm not really good at saying this kind of thing, but I think you understand. So it's, like you copy and move and Okay, now let's get back to this. The 15th verse instructed us not to be attached to appearances, kleshas, and mental states. The 16th verse points out, again by analogy, that we must recognize dharmata, and that dharmata, while having no substantial entity, nevertheless can be recognized. Now, dharmata, the nature of mind, has from the very beginning been emptiness, and therefore is without substantial entity or existence. Nevertheless, one can familiarize oneself with it, and it can be realized. If it is realized, the final fruition or result will be achieved. While it can be experienced and realized, however, it can't be seen by the senses because it has no substantial characteristics. Now, the analogy presented in this verse for this is the fragrance of flowers. If flowers are present in one room, their fragrance will spread to adjacent rooms. Nevertheless, if you are in the adjacent rooms, you will not see flowers because the flowers themselves are not visible. Nevertheless, the room in which you are situated is filled with the flower's fragrance. In the same way, dharmata, the nature of the mind, having no form and being empty, cannot be perceived or seen in the usual way. The nature of all things is emptiness. And in mahamudra practice, we experience this emptiness or this nature through direct observation of the mind. But in observing this, there is nothing that is seen in the usual sense. Furthermore, in the practice of mahamudra, we are not attempting to transform something that exists into something non-existent, nor to transform something non-existent into something that exists. This nature is the inherent or natural emptiness of all things, and in this context of the mind in particular. But this emptiness, which we observe in the mind, is not dead emptiness or nothingness, because it is at the same time lucidity or wisdom. While it is emptiness, it is also lucidity. And while it is lucidity, it is also empty. So this is the nature that must be known. And because of its lucidity, it can be experienced, although because of its emptiness, it has no substantial form or existence. It is this that must be known, and it is this nature that must be realized. Now, when the mind's nature is recognized, the result is the arising of what is called the wheel or mandala of the three kayas or three bodies. Now, the mind itself is unborn and empty. It is through the recognition of that emptiness of the mind in nature that all that is to be abandoned or relinquished is abandoned. And it is abandoned because one recognizes that all that is to be abandoned has no true existence. And therefore, through that recognition, it is freed or liberated of its own nature. But when the nature of mind is recognized, what is recognized is that it is not just emptiness, but is at the same time lucidity or wisdom. And through the recognition of the lucidity, one attains what is to be attained, which is the Dharmakaya. The qualities of the Dharmakaya can be enumerated as wisdom, loving kindness, and ability to protect. Now, the Dharmakaya in its wisdom knows the absolute truth. It sees the nature of all things just as it is, through having realized that nature. That knowledge or wisdom which knows the nature of all things is called the wisdom which knows how things are, or which knows the nature of things. But if you ask, does the Dharmakaya only know the absolute nature of things? Does it not know the manifestations, the variety, the appearances of things? The answer is, it does also know that. It knows the characteristics of all appearances, but it knows these to be bewilderment. Of itself, it sees itself dharmata, or emptiness, but it also sees or knows the bewilderment of beings. And this knowledge or wisdom, which knows the bewilderment of beings and therefore what beings experience, is called the wisdom which knows what there is, or which knows the variety of appearances of relative truth. An analogy for this is as follows. Imagine that one person is lying asleep in bed and dreaming. At their bedside is a second person who has excellent extrasensory perception or supercognition. Therefore, that second person who is awake is fully aware of the content of the dreams of the person who is asleep. Now, the person with extrasensory perception knows that the person who is asleep is just asleep in bed, but they nevertheless see the content of all of their dreams, the mountains and places and people they encounter and so forth. Now, the person with extrasensory perception is not having those dreams, but they are aware that the other person is having them, and they are aware that they are just dreams. In the same way, the Buddha does not experience bewilderment, but does see, in all its detail and variety, the bewilderment of beings. The Dharmakaya not only possesses this excellent wisdom, which both knows absolute truth and relative truth, how things appear, but through possessing this excellent and consummate wisdom, it naturally possesses great compassion for all beings. Great compassion for all beings who are suffering, who undergo mental affliction, and even for beings who are temporarily not suffering or afflicted, but are still bewildered. So therefore, the Dharmakaya, the mind of a Buddha, possesses not only twofold wisdom, but also consummate loving kindness. Since it possesses that wisdom and that loving kindness, since while possessing that wisdom it sees with compassion all beings, the Dharmakaya is not unable to protect beings. It is able to bring about the protection and benefit of beings through various methods. So therefore, in that way, the mind of the Buddha, the Dharmakaya, possesses the qualities of wisdom, loving kindness, and ability to protect, which are the result of the path. From the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya, or considered together, the Rupakaya or form body, arise. The Dharmakaya, with its qualities of wisdom, loving kindness, and ability, is like the cause of these. But the Dharmakaya cannot be encountered by sentient beings. So therefore, it arises as the Rupakaya, or form body. For the benefit of those with purified karma, that is to say, bodhisattvas abiding on any of the 10 levels or bhumis, the Dharmakaya arises as the Sambhogakaya. And Sambhoga, or perfect enjoyment here, refers to the fact that the Sambhogakaya continually teaches Dharma without interruption and never needs to pass into parinirvana. In that way, the Sambhogakaya is endowed with what are called 5 certainties. Now, those with unpure karma cannot encounter this Sambhogakaya, so for their benefit, the Dharmakaya arises as the Nirmanakaya, which is relatively impure, enters the world, performs the 12 deeds, and so forth. So in that way, these 3 bodies or 3 kayas arise as a result of having meditated on the nature. The 17th verse is concerned with demonstrating that all appearances are the appearances of the mind. Now, while this is the case, we perceive appearances as very solid and substantial. Earth, stones, mountains, rocks, and so forth all seem very solid to us, and it is therefore quite hard for us to understand how these things could be merely the appearances of one's mind. In order to point this out, for example, in the Ocean of Definitive Meaning, it is first indicated that appearances are mind, then that mind is emptiness, and so forth, and this is presented in some detail. The topic of this verse is that same point. While it is the case that earth and stone and mountains and rocks are in their nature one's own mind, in terms of how they appear as form, they seem vast, huge, and very solid. We might wonder, how can our mind contain, encompass, and perceive that which is so big and so apparently solid? The analogy presented here is the analogy of water and ice. Water, when it is not frozen, is a liquid, and therefore is not solid, does not have the characteristic of being unbending and hard like rock. But when a body of water is subjected to a very cold wind, it freezes and becomes ice. And ice is hard like stone. Now, ice is nothing other than the water itself. And normally we think water isn't hard. And yet, ice is water, and it is hard. In the same way, when your mind becomes disturbed by ignorance and kleshas, which are like that cold wind in the analogy, it produces coarse thoughts. And the gradual production of coarser and coarser thoughts, and therefore coarser and coarser mode of appearance, corresponds to the gradual freezing of the water. These coarse thoughts cause the so solid appearance of earth and stones and mountains and rocks, even though the thoughts themselves began as mere insubstantial thoughts. In that way, the 17th verse is a generalized presentation of the fact that appearances are mind. Now, in Mahamudra instruction, after it has been explained that appearances are mind, it is often explained that mind is empty or emptiness, that emptiness is spontaneous presence, and that spontaneous presence is self-liberated. And this is what is explained in the 18th verse. While the mind is empty, it is not empty in the sense of being dead or nothing at all, because it has at the same time the characteristic of cognitive lucidity. Now, this nature of the mind, emptiness that is at the same time cognitive lucidity, has never been damaged or in itself in any way affected by all of the appearances and all of the bewilderment of the three realms of samsara. So therefore, one has to ask, is liberation from samsara actually the effecting of a change in the mind at all? It is not. From the very beginning, the mind has been empty and has been lucid. Therefore, in meditation, we are not trying to change what the mind is. We are not trying to make that which is not empty into something empty, or make that which is not lucid into something lucid. All we are doing in the practice of meditation is experiencing the mind as it is and as it always has been. When the mind is experienced and finally realized as it is, then that in itself is liberation. There is no need to change the mind's nature, because that nature of the mind has never been affected by all of the bewilderment of the three realms of samsara. Often the nature of the mind is called Buddha nature or Sugata Garbha, which means the essence of those gone to bliss. Now, when the term Sugata Garbha is used, as it often is in textual traditions, because it is so exalted a term, even though it refers to the nature of our own minds, it sounds very distant from us and very far off and unapproachable. It's therefore important to understand what this term Sugata Garbha really means. Sugata means those gone to bliss. So Su here means bliss. Bliss means if you recognize and realize the nature of your mind, you transcend and eliminate the sufferings of samsara. Therefore, the result of realizing the mind's nature is bliss. Gata or gone means that innumerable Buddhas have appeared, and all of them have achieved awakening through realizing the nature of their minds and thereby attaining the bliss of Buddhahood. All of them began as bewildered sentient beings. They transcended the bewilderment and suffering of samsara and achieved or went to a bliss. Now, we want to and we need to follow them. We want to realize the nature of our minds and go to bliss. The question arises, do we have the ability to do so? The answer is yes. We have the innate or inherent ability or capacity to follow and emulate those who have gone to bliss, those Buddhas. Now, if we lacked their makeup, if we lacked what they had and what they have, then we might not be able to do it. But we have in our nature everything that they ever had and have. Therefore, since we have what they have and they did it, therefore we can do it. So that is why the nature of the mind is called the nature or essence of those gone to bliss. About this, in the Uttara Tantra Shastra, it says, like a jewel, like space, and like pure water, it is continually free of affliction. Now, when a jewel is purified, that is to say, when what surrounds it is removed, the nature of the jewel itself does not change. The jewel was always jewel in its nature or composition. When clouds disappear from the sky, the space of the sky does not undergo any change, and the space was not inherently affected or polluted in its nature by the presence of the clouds. Water is in and of itself just water, pure water. It only becomes polluted when sediment is introduced into it or mixed with it. But even so, the water itself remains just water. It is combined with something, but not in itself affected by or changed or damaged by the presence of the sediment. In the same way, while our minds are afflicted and obscured by ignorance and kleshas and thoughts, the nature of the mind, our minds in and of themselves, are not afflicted or affected by the presence of these things. Nevertheless, while these things are present, then the qualities of the mind's nature will not be evident. So therefore it says in the verse, if a supreme gem is placed in a swampy mire, its radiance, however, will not be clear. I'm going to stop with the principal instruction here with the explanation of the 18th verse. Yesterday I began to introduce the practice of shine, or tranquility meditation, for the benefit of beginning students, and I'm going to continue with that explanation today. Yesterday I presented the methods for getting a hold of the mind when it has not been gotten a hold of. And through the practice of those methods, one becomes able to enable the pacification of coarse and subtle thoughts. And one begins to be able to rest one's mind. So for the benefit of beginning practitioners, today I'm going to explain the second stage or second aspect of tranquility instruction, which is called stabilizing the mind once it has been grasped or once it has been gotten a hold of. Now, this category can include many different instructions and methods, but those of principal importance among them are what are called the 9 methods of resting the mind. The first of these 9 is placement or rest. Now, placement or rest refers to what was described in the quotation I gave yesterday from the 3rd Jawon Karmapa, the waves of coarse and subtle thoughts being pacified in their own place. May the river of mind rest without distraction or unmoving in its nature. When one practices placement, one rests the mind free of thought in its own natural or inherent clarity. So placement or rest consists of remaining or resting briefly in a state of lucid tranquility. And because one develops this as a beginner, this state of rest or placement may be very, very brief. Now this is somewhat or comparatively easy to accomplish, but it is also not enough. One has to go further. Therefore, the second method of resting the mind is called continued or prolonged placement. And continued or prolonged placement means simply to gain the ability to slightly prolong the periods of rest or placement of the mind. For example, If in the beginning one could rest the mind in lucid tranquility for 1 second, one prolongs it until one can do so for 2 seconds, and finally 3 seconds, and so forth. While practicing placement and prolonged placement, still, from time to time, one finds oneself becoming distracted. And in this case, distraction means when the arising of a thought or a series of thoughts prevent you from bringing your mind to rest. Therefore, in order to deal with this situation, you need the third method of resting the mind, which is usually referred to or can be referred to by two terms. One is close placement, and the other one is returning placement. Of the two, returning placement is more descriptive, so that's the one that I will use. And it means pretty much what it sounds like. When you become distracted by the arising of a thought or thoughts, rather than allowing your mind just to go with or be caught by the distraction, as soon as you recognize that you have become distracted, you return to the resting of the mind. You return to placement. Now, this does not mean regarding the occurrence of distraction as either a good or bad. It is unnecessary to regard it as bad, as a problem, because it is part of the process of training in meditation, and therefore should not be regarded or need not be regarded as a particular problem or defect. But it should also not be regarded as a quality, because distraction does prevent one's progressing in the practice of meditation. So therefore, in that way, having recognized distraction, rather than judging it as one thing or another, one simply returns to the placement of the mind, and that is what is called returning placement. The fourth method of resting the mind is here called close placement. And close placement means that after having applied the third, in other words, after having recognized distraction and simply returned to a state of placement, one continues to rest the mind through the continued application of mindfulness and alertness. But in addition to these four, sometimes one will experience that one's mind is simply unwilling to do it. This can be because one is tired, or for other reasons unenthusiastic about the practice of meditation, or through lacking energy in the practice, one may simply be overpowered by the appearance of thoughts. So at this point, in addition to the beginner's practice of placement, prolonged placement, returning placement, and close placement, you need a fifth method or technique, which is called taming. Now, taming here means the recollection of the qualities and benefits of meditation. When you are tired and unenthusiastic, and therefore your mind is temporarily unable to meditate properly, by recollecting the reasons why you are practicing, the benefits and importance of practice, whether it is tranquility or insight, the usefulness and value of meditation practice, you will generate enthusiasm. The enthusiasm itself will tame or subdue your mind and give it the energy to return to the practice of placement. I'm going to stop for this morning with the instruction to beginning students to try to practice all of this, and then we'll recite the dedication and aspiration.